Alright everyone, and welcome to another episode of the That Makes Sensei Podcast. What's the topic for today?
Great question. Today we are talking about what you liked when you were a kid. So what were your interests as a child? So how about for you, Dan? What did you like when you were a kid?
You know, depends how old we're talking. If I was 0, I liked crying and milk. As I got a bit older, I got more into some other things. My first big love, if you like, was football, footy, whatever you want to call it. When I were a young'un, I was mad about football. Always playing football on the street with my mates. Played in like school football teams and whatnot. I even played for Leeds United Juniors once upon a time. But there you go. You won't know now, looking at me.
What
but
position?
There you go. A striker. Yeah.
Interesting.
But you would have no idea looking at this fat lad that's looking at you now. But that's what I used to do. I used to go to watch football with my dad. I used to go to Hillsborough, home of the Owls, Sheffield Wednesday. And yeah, I think football was my first big passion in my life. How about you, Stu? Were you into footy as a kid?
Yeah, football would probably be number one. When I was a kid, loved sports of any type, really. Video games and sports, I'd say, were the two things. So I was like super outside and then super inside. So it's quite an interesting combination.
Super outside and Super Nintendo.
Super Nintendo. Actually, mine wasn't Super Nintendo. Mine was Sega. I was a big Sega, Mega Drive or Genesis, if depending where you live. Fan. Loved a bit of Streets of Rage all over.
What a game.
Road Rash as well.
Game.
Road Rash.
Yeah.
My favourite.
What? That game was mad for its time.
Yeah.
It was a game where you were racing motorbikes, but you could just smash something out of the other people with a bat. All right. And you're advertising this to kids. Like, you what?
Yeah. This is really how we drive, guys.
But let's just go back to footy for a second. Like, did you just watch it? Did you play it? Like, what?
Both. I literally anything. I was just surrounded by it all the time. You know, I always part of teams and always just, you know, pretty much heart and soul into it. I was big fan of fantasy football, have been since I was really young when the first ones were coming out. And I just, obsessive really would probably be the best word, yeah. How about you?
But I think that's kind of normal being a kid in the UK, you know, like, you can't escape it. Like, especially in our generation, we didn't really have internet and stuff, so you just had to, like, it's all lads our age did. You played footy with your mates, you went home, you watched football, and probably played FIFA on your Super Nintendo or something, and
or rugby.
Football
Some people,
life.
it's like half and half. Well, I'd say like 60-40. Rugby as well, yeah. Rugby was either or, you know. You were interested.
I think so. But definitely as a younger kid, we didn't really play rugby. It was more footy. And, you know, that's what you do at school. At break time, you'd play footy. You'd go home, you'd meet your mates, you'd play footy. And that were just what you did as a young lad. I wonder if it's the same for kids nowadays, because they've got, you know, internet and Fortnite and whatever kids do these days. I don't know if they're out on the streets playing football anymore. Probably too many old lasses were like, stop playing ball near my house or whatever. So I don't know.
How many old lasses were part of your neighbourhood? But for me, there wasn't so much of that. There was like, we played football in the streets or whatever, which is crazy when I think about it now. Now I have 2 kids, so that would never be something I'd let them do, because it's just, in my eyes, is wild. But or at the park, local park or something. One of the things I remember during that period of time was, you know, we didn't have mobile phones, or they weren't so frequent at least, and what I had to do was have a watch, and then I would, regardless of where I wanted to go, I had to come home like 30 minutes later just to check in, or an hour later to check in. You know, there was like this other method to getting in touch with your kids. So it was kind of crazy, you know.
That's funny, man. Like, for me, my mum would always be like, wherever you go, as long as you're home by street lights coming on. When the street lights came on, I had to be home. And that were it. But we'd play on the street, and as a kid, you're like, oh, I'm just going to get a drink, and you'd run into house and get a drink and then come out again. And, oh, I forgot this thing, I'm going to go into house again. And you get to a point where your dad would be like, oi, you're either in or you're out. Choose. And this was such a Yorkshire thing, I don't know. But growing up, my dad would always be like, all right, that's 4 times. You're not coming back in again. Either choose outside or choose inside. So maybe it's just like my childhood, like growing up, you know, parents that made you either choose inside or outside, and old birds telling you not to play footy near their house and that. Maybe it's just Yorkshire, you know.
Old birds. yeah, not literal birds, guys, by the way.
Check the vocabulary sheet if you want to know what that means.
That's a link for that in the description as well, guys.
Good bit of housekeeping, Stu. Well played.
I'm all over it today. All over it, and that's a nice one as well. That'll be on there, guys. So I do remember, like, there's some... I don't remember a great deal from my childhood, but I remember, like, key points that are really locked into my mind of things that I enjoy. So obviously playing football, and halfway through my life, through my childhood, I moved from Essex to Devon, 2 different places, one in the countryside, one in the city, you know. And in the current countryside, I would be just playing football against the wall, you know, kicking the ball against the wall. But I do remember the first time I got a Game Boy, like a grey brick Game Boy, and getting Tetris and playing the first Pokemon when that came out, because I'm that old.
Mate, I'm going to just grab something off this shelf here.
For those of you who can't see, I'll describe. So Dan is showing us
Pokemon
4
Blue,
games in his hands.
Pokemon Red, Yellow.
Pokemon Yellow. Japanese ones or...
Yeah.
The Japanese version.
Green one.
Pokemon Blue, Red and Yellow and Green. Green, which wasn't released in the West.
Yeah, it's different. But I was also mad into Pokemon as a kid. I think that was like the first craze or trend or whatever you want to call it that I really jumped on as a kid. And I could not get enough of it. Like the games, the TV show, the cards, everything. To this day, it still affects my life. You'll see Pokemon stuff behind me, and you'll hear my cat screaming about Pokemon as well. She's a big fan.
She loves it. I've heard. She's got her own Instagram profile where she's dressing up as different Pokemon characters. Yeah, I've seen it. She loves
Don't, because my wife will start doing it. Don't.
It'll be wonderful.
Mad into Pokemon as a young lad. Stu, main question I want to ask you, and it's more important than any other question on this podcast. Which starter did you choose? Yeah.
Yeah, I knew it. You go first.
Mate, all day Squirrel. Not even a decision.
Same. Okay,
yeah, good lad. Good lad.
What about the water one? Yeah.
In it, because, you know, first gym leader were Brock, and he had rocks, so you could smash their head in with Squirtle. And then Misty, by that point, it weren't that bad because you were an higher level than her, and you could just smash her and all.
And then the Bulbasaur, the grass one, many people probably have no idea what we're talking about. The grass one seemed too easy for me. So I was like, that's too easy. But then fire against rocket doesn't make sense. So it's got to go middle of the road all the time.
Safe option. Safe parents, Squirrel. I mean, this is a thing that all over the world people have that, of our generation have that same discussion. Like, which Pokemon did you choose to start with? And you can tell a lot about a person which one they choose. Like,
well, that's like saying, in Japan, if many people don't know, but in Japan they kind of decide what a person will be like based on their blood type instead of like horoscopes or something like this. And then now you're saying like this, well, I definitely know what he's like if he chose a Bulbasaur. Oh, he's a crazy guy, that guy.
Exactly, mate. Like, if you chose Squirtle, you're obviously an intelligent young man. And if you chose Bulbasaur, you're a weak person because you just take the easy way out. And if you choose Charizard, if you're Charizard, you're an idiot. Charmander, even.
What you're trying to suggest is that Charmander is for extroverts, Bulbasaur is for introverts, and Squirtle's middle of the road, yeah?
Yeah, let's go with that. That's a more PC way of saying what I said.
Okay, excellent news.
Back to gaming, like as a kid, I were well into games as well. I think for me, the game that the most impact on my life, Street Fighter. I were even wearing a Street Fighter t-shirt, you know. So even to this day as well, huge impact on my life, and loved Street Fighter, Ryu and Ken and Blanka and all that stuff. And I used to absolutely love the fact that I could do a Hadouken, and like, yes, this is so sick. But I was shit at it, but I loved it.
I've got a really important question for you.
Go on then.
Whatever happened to Street Fighter 1?
It existed, but it was shit. That's what happened to it. Completely off topic. Last month, I went to a Street Fighter exhibition in Osaka.
Convention?
It was just like an exhibition, like an art gallery kind of thing. And they had like the stuff for Street Fighter 1. And the reason it didn't work is the arcade machine just had like the stick to move the guy and 2 buttons. But they were pressure sensitive buttons, so you had to like hit the button. And the harder you hit it, the more powerful the move. The problem is people just breaking their hand. And like health and safety were like, you can't do this.
Breaking the button, that's a very bizarre, interesting.
So that's why it didn't last, and that's why nobody knows what it is.
And that's how we got those machines when you go to the pub and it's like the punching ball and then you punch it and then the score comes up.
They're a disaster in pubs, just on a side note.
Yeah, what the hell
Drunk
are
people
doing?
and like trying to smack a punching bag as hard as you can. That's a recipe for disaster.
That is a recipe for disaster. Indeed.
Unbelievable, Jeff. Yeah, the amount of videos you see on TikTok are just drunk people completely missing or, falling over while they're trying to do it is pretty damn high. But yeah, my first memory gaming, probably Super Nintendo, I think.
Yeah, you were either one or the other, weren't you?
Yeah.
Mega Drive or Super Nintendo. I loved it, man. It's so good. Mortal Kombat. And,
great game.
Road Rash, like I said, Road Rash was such a good classic. I could play that for hours.
I remember Road Rash. The cartridge was different to like a regular Mega Drive cartridge. It got like a yellow chip in it or something.
It was made by EA.
Yeah, that's right.
So at one stage, the EA games all had that yellow chip. So
there's probably a YouTube video explaining exactly why that's the case, but I don't know.
100%. It's like the early version of not a trademark, but back in the day, you could make a cartridge that was the same game but for cheaper. Although cartridges were expensive, they could do that. They could copy it. So it was their way of trademarking or making a copyright on it because you couldn't copy because it had the yellow. That's my assumption. It makes the most sense to me.
It makes sense to me. But...
all EA games at one point had that chip.
Yeah, I remember a FIFA game with it in as well, so maybe it were a thing. It never left, old games and especially when you got to like PlayStation or N64 when you could play 4-player with your mates, that's when things got serious. Can you remember WWF Warzone?
I know it, of course, and I've played it, but I played it outside of the time when it was really popular. So I had the first SmackDown.
That was also an amazing game.
Yeah.
And you do like L in a cell and just spend all your time throwing each other off top of it or whatever. Them games where you could play 4-player were absolutely, as a kid, just like, this changes everything. This is absolutely amazing. 4 people come round, everyone brings their own controller. Or even if you're playing, FIFA or whatever, you could.
Do you ever play CTR?
CTR, Crash Team Racing.
Yeah.
I was much more a Mario Kart guy. Mario Kart for the N64 was my jam. Since I've come to Japan, I've started buying retro games. That's what all this is over here.
I'm all about that, retro game life. But I haven't had a chance to. It's expensive.
It is a bit expensive. In Japan, it's not so bad. You can kind of get games relatively cheap compared to it would be if you were in England, but, it's still not cheap in the grand scheme of things. So, footy, gaming, anything else that you were mad into when you were a young'un?
I'd say if we take football and gaming, I'd say gaming was from like 7 years old. Football pretty much all my life. But then I would say from the age of around about 12, 13, music obviously came into play. Like we mentioned in previous podcasts, I was into rock or ska or this kind of thing. And went to quite a few concerts, So that took up quite a bit of my life as well.
Yeah, exactly the same. Almost the same age. For me, it's so vivid. I remember exactly when and what happened.
What was your first... did we do this last time?
We mentioned first music, but first time that I really got into music was Offspring had a single, Pretty Fly for a White Guy.
Yeah.
And I bought the single CD, and on the B-side, there's a song called All I Want Live. And I listened to that, and I was like, that's it. That's the thing that I like. And from that day, I just started going down the rabbit hole and discovering new bands and going to concerts. And it's no word of a lie, but that CD changed my entire life. It seriously, from like the people I know I learned music because of that CD. I learned to play guitar. I went to university to study sound engineering because I was so into music. That started at that point. Pretty Fly for a White Guy completely changed my life. That is the tagline for this episode.
I was well into Daft Punk as well. We're talking about punk and ska, but really dance music, specifically them. Really enjoyed their music. So, but my first few were like Gorillaz and Foo Fighters, and then eventually getting in the scene and understanding more about what different types of music there's out there. So, I didn't believe I had the skills to do anything musically, but although I would have loved to, maybe that's the thing that held me back from going to do something extra. You know quite a few instruments, don't you?
Yeah, I taught myself to play guitar as a probably about 14 years old. And if you can play guitar, you can play bass. And if you can play bass, you can probably play banjo and ukulele. And then I taught myself to play drums, despite the fact I have owned a drum kit for about 3 months in my entire life. I used to play in bands, and when we'd be at band practice, inevitably you'd take a break, and I'd be like, right, I'm going to play on drums for a bit. And I kind of just taught myself to play drums at a drum kit and tapping on desks and stuff like that. I'd love a drum kit here in Japan, but paper thin walls and it's never going to happen.
We're talking about childhood, but let's move forward to your journey through between 20 and now. Do you think that your likes when you were a kid, have any of them have disappeared, or you have gone in? Is there anything that you really liked as a kid that you really 180'd on?
Not so much. I'm not as into footy as I used to be. I'll watch it if it's on TV, but I've been to watch a few games in Japan. I went to watch Vissel Kobe, and they just signed Podolski and Iniesta at the time, so it was pretty good. But I don't really go out my way to watch it. I'll see the results and I'll keep an eye on what's happening, but I don't go out my way to watch it anymore. Gaming, I love, but in a different way to when I was a kid. I now seem to get more pleasure out of finding the games in the shop and having them in my hand than I do actually playing them, because I don't have enough time to really get into it. I really
understand what you mean, actually.
Yeah, that's kind of evolved, and music, that'll be part of my life forever. That's never going to go away. So, yeah, I think I'm still interested, but in different ways. How about you?
Football lasted all the way through my life. So when I was super young, I played for a non-league team's youth team for a couple of years, and then I got a leg injury, so I wasn't able to play for 2 years. And then when I came back, I was like, well, I want to play as much as possible. So I played throughout my life, but my biggest issue was that as soon as 18 came, I drank a lot, so I started to put on weight. And then I was still good. I am a good player, but not. I could have been much more, I think, if I really put time and effort into it. You don't realise when you're a kid, I think. And then, but looking back, and then I played some futsal here as well. So I was lucky, really. Futsal's fun. I like that a lot. And then in terms of gaming, it's same, really. I just don't have time for it. But when I do, I can get into it. I have to finish it, kind of thing. I've become a completion person in the last maybe 10 years, rather than trying out lots of different games, which is what I was when I was a kid.
What I've done recently is I've been and bought some old consoles, like a Super Nintendo or whatever, and I'm looking at old games I played, and I'm like, oh, I never actually completed this. My brother did, but I didn't. So now I'm setting myself little challenges, like go through Super Mario World and finish it or whatever. But that's a nice little trip down memory lane, that, Stu. I enjoyed
100%. 100%. It was a good chat, good, interesting session.
And in terms of today's question for the listeners, what have you got for us?
So I'd love to know, what is the thing, maybe when you were a kid, that you used to do that you don't do anymore? So
let us know in the comments if you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching somewhere else, send us a message on Instagram.
If you're watching on the moon.
Hear from you. Yeah, if you're watching on the moon, I don't know, mime, that'll work. We'll keep an eye out for you.
Send up a flare.
But Stu, it was an emotional episode today. I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you again next week.
Speak to you soon. Ciao, ciao.